All right, we're rolling. Ties into Surly Mood, but it is Father's Day, so I got my two sons here,
Mhm.
and we decided to talk today because our guest star, my younger son Kenji,
I
is here, and he was complaining about how people he knows are having political discussions are too extreme in their ideologies. How did you describe it? What is the term you used for it?
I just think like extremism or political extremism is
Uh,
increasing in our younger generations, and it's something that I feel is becoming increasingly prevalent. At least,
So it wasn't extreme like in the 1960s or
I mean, I'm sure it was extreme back then
yeah.
too. It's just something that I've particularly been noticing, especially like personally. There's a lot of people I know, like in my class, who kind of have these extreme ideologies, and it's it's really becoming kind of bothersome to me because I don't particularly believe in these, and I think that it's kind of making it harder to communicate with these people too.
Well, I'll tell you just from my old person's perspective that on the one hand, it's refreshing. I think it's kind of good to know that young people like actually care enough to, be extreme and not just like be apathetic and not care at all about stuff. But I hear you as an old person also, having been young once and been a little more extreme in my own views. I've moderated a little bit, not completely, of course, but I've moderate a little bit. And so, yeah, I hear what you're saying when you say some of your friends or people are really extreme in their views. But you want to give some kind of examples. You don't have to name names, of course, but
Yeah, I mean, there's a whole like group of people in I guess my old school now because I graduated, but yeah, they totally adhere to like communist ideologies, and I'm all for understanding new ideologies, trying to break out of this path that we're currently on, and trying to find new things to believe in. And honestly, I think that this group of people particularly have made the most change. They've had the most action. I think in large part because of that extremism. That said, uh, I do find it a little bit concerning because if this path kind of continues, more people join this cause, it could lead to a lot of societal disruptions and more extremism kind of spreading out from that.
Societal disruption. What do you mean?
yeah, this was
Yeah, I mean maybe that was a bad way to phrase it, but I'm thinking more like rebellion type behavior. I don't know. I think each and every one of them has like adherence to one particular like communist leader, for example. And I'm a little bit afraid of kind of that path that they might be going on, especially because I care about a lot of these people, and I'm a little bit worried for what they may do in the
so.
future.
So you mean these conservatives who are talking about radical leftists? They're actually know what they're talking about. There are, I mean, like, are they going to be terrorists and they'll try to overthrow the U.S. government or, bomb, public buildings or something like that? What are we talking about here?
I mean, probably not that far, but so far as like what I've seen personally, they're kind of leading into those stages, and at least like I guess the issues that I've had personally are just that it's becoming increasingly difficult to find middle grounds because they're so extreme on that political spectrum.
I mean, what is your communist spirit animal?
My communist spirit animal, gee, I wouldn't say I have one. I'm more of a moderate thinking person in that regard.
AKA a pussy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, see, now maybe he's heard me talk too much. Maybe that's why. Because, like I said, I've got more moderate, but that's just because I found that extremism. It doesn't matter what, right or left or anywhere in anything, just is not healthy, not productive. And when it comes to politics, I don't think it works because if you're extreme on one side and there's people extreme on the other side, how are you going to be able to get along? I mean, is the only way you're going to solve your problems by like battling it out with one side completely winning and the other side completely losing? The only thing other than that is to compromise, right? So that's why I'm a little more moderate, just understanding, even if ideologically I might be way on one side. I just know from experience and what I've studied in history that if you're going to get along as a society, no one group can have it all their way. They're going to have to make compromises.
Yeah, I totally agree. And actually, this kind of brings me to one of the things I wanted to talk about here with this subject. And it's that one member of this group, particularly, and I'm sure a lot of these people kind of agree with the sentiment, that Mayor, I think he's Mayor, right? Yeah, Mayor Mamdani
Oh yeah,
in New York City is like a bad example of what a socialist would be because he doesn't fully adhere to these ideologies, or he's not going above and beyond on this kind of socialist extremism. Whereas my belief is that he's doing a lot of good social progress and he has some socialist policies, and that's making a lot of positive change. But they kind of denounce him as somebody who isn't fully adhering to that. So what kind of are your thoughts on that extremist view?
Well, Ty can talk about what he thinks about Mamdani, but I'll just say they're I hate to sound like an old fogey here, but I just think they're politically naive. How's the guy going to get elected if he's like as extreme as they want him to be? If he's going to be within the system and have to get elected, we live in a democracy, you have to get elected. There's no way he's going to get elected if he's as extreme as they want him to be, right? He's going to have to moderate that at least a little bit, right, to get elected. If you don't get elected, then you can't do anything, right? Better to get 85% of what you want than nothing, right? The alternative would be, again, revolution, which, look, I don't, look, I wouldn't say that revolution is bad in all circumstances. I'm a fan of the American Revolution. I think that was a good idea, right? Sometimes you have to go to that extreme, right? But I don't think we're there right now. That's not to say that we're not getting closer than we were 10, 20 years ago. Things, the way they're going now, I could see at some point the need for a revolution, but I don't think we're there yet. Let's try to continue with the process. Let's not have violence. Let's not have like total upheaval, because that's, very risky, for all sorts of different things to happen, unintended consequences. So let's keep trying to work within the system. And if you're going to do that, you're going to have to make some compromises. That's just all there is to it. But Ty, what do you think about this? Since I know you like Mamdani a lot.
Yeah, I've always disagreed with you on the election take. I think that it's, I think too often we hear the take that you need to sell your soul to get elected as a politician. And, I do appreciate actually the view that, that there is more that can be done. Promises Mamdani made that haven't been, upheld necessarily. And I do think that he's been doing a good job overall. So I do disagree. And I definitely hate the perspective that he's not communist enough, therefore he's not communist at all. He's not a socialist. He's not a real one. Like, all those takes are really stupid. I think that's extremism taken too far. And it's like, look, man, the guy's gonna say what he's gonna say, and he is doing good things. I think it is a foolish mistake to like not vote for him, for example, in favor of somebody else, or not vote at all just because a candidate isn't perfect. Right.
It's ideological purity. They call that.
Yeah, exactly. They did that to Bernie in 2016, right. And it totally, she annihilated the entire presidential election. We ended up with Trump, and to say Trump is, like Bernie's supporters didn't vote for Hillary, for that reason, for purity reason. That's like, dude, like, Hillary's a mile better than Trump if you believe in what Bernie believes.
Exactly. And so you can't always get what you want, 100% of what you want. Hillary Clinton would have been 85% of what they wanted, or even 60%, but that's better than 0 or negative of what they want with Trump, right? So
yeah, and I would say the same with Mamdani. He's the closest thing to a true socialist that has been in any position of power in America lately. And he hasn't done everything, and I definitely agree that you should be pushing to do more and keep his promises more. For example, he talked about cutting the New York City budget deficit, and he basically like put a Band-Aid fix on it by doing the equivalent of like mortgaging your house, right? He like put off basically loans that they already needed, and also got a cash infusion from a tax backlog that the governor managed to secure. So it wasn't really his doing, and the problem still persists. But the point is, he's making steps in the right direction, and even if he's putting off the deficit for now, it gives him more time to solve it in the now. And so I think that the argument that he's shit because he's not socialist enough is like, look, man, he's doing better things, at least in their worldview, than anyone else in America has in like a decade at least.
But see, now it sounds like you're agreeing with me, Ty, that he has to be a realist to a certain extent. Can't get 100% of what he wants. He does have to think about getting elected. He has to moderate.
No, I'm not saying that he has to get elected at all. I'm saying that if that's his viewpoint, that's his viewpoint. You know what I'm saying? The only thing I'm arguing with that in favor of them is that their criticism. I mean, in favor of your point is that I do think that some of their criticisms of him are valid, in the sense that there are promises of his that he made during the election that he has not yet really fulfilled, right? The budget deficit.
Yeah, maybe because he can't. Maybe because these are more difficult than a campaign slogan. And this happens to every campaign. I mean, look at it on the other side. Trump with all his ridiculous Mexico is going to pay for the wall. Of course, that's not going to happen.
Look, I see what you're saying now, but that's not my point. Is that he's putting off the deficit, and I'm not giving him a pass for that. Like I think that it would obviously it would be better if you fix the deficit. I'm just saying that it's better he did that than not do anything at all, and therefore the criticism of him is going too far.
Well, but
But it's still good.
there's two major categories of ways to solve the deficit problem: raising more revenue, which means taxes,
Yeah.
right, which is going to be unpopular, and he won't get
Or cutting
reelected,
programs.
or cutting programs. And if he's a socialist, then he wants more programs, right? So, and some of his promises, right, that he's going to have to pay for. I have to put in a plug here because I was always a big fan. I know not everybody feels this way, and certainly he had his detractors in his day. But I think if you look back on Jerry Brown, former governor of California, I just read a biography of him called Man of Tomorrow by Jim Newton. And, he was a guy who was very principled. He had this hardcore Catholic upbringing. He did 3 years in the seminary. He's going to be a priest. He had a moral center, and he was very liberal, climate change, diversity, issues like that. But he was also very much a political realist. His father had been governor. He knew how the system worked, and he made compromises where he thought he had to, right? And that's what allowed him to ultimately serve 4 terms in governor, balance the budget, actually get a surplus, right, while still protecting the environment, right? And actually even get tax raises, tax hikes put through by the voters of California. He got them to vote for a tax hike to solve budget problems that were created by his predecessors in between his 2 stints as governor. So, it's possible, but you're going to have to be somewhat realistic. You see what battles you can win, and you stick to your guns on those ones. You have to compromise. You have to compromise ones that you just can't win. Like he lost the Prop 13 battle, which has been causing the California budget problems ever since 1978 when it was passed. He lost that battle. It got voted in by the people, and he just had to deal with it. And he had to find ways to balance the budget, still have the programs that he wanted to have, the social programs, the educational programs, even though he was not the greatest friend of public higher education, I have to say. And so, but that's politics, right? That's the reality of politics. And he managed to do it. So by the end of his last stint as governor, I think you'd have to say he was a very successful governor.
So it sounds like, having some good policies is better than none for sure. I'm curious though why this kind of extremist view that they're not doing enough, or this extremist view that, oftentimes like none might be better than some, how that gets so popular. Because I know that at least the group of people I'm talking about it spread like wildfire.
Again.
Oh, wait, one second. I mentioned the Brown thing before. Yes, I hear what you're saying, but I don't think it's the same. You're conflating 2 different things. You're talking about him. Yes, he did lose some battles, and you do lose some battles in politics. But if you lose the battle, it's about how you respond. That's different than compromising before you even fight the battle on issues that you do believe in. But anyway,
it's true. No, and that's why he and on some of those he did stick to his guns. Like one of them was, a criminal justice. He was called, bleeding heart liberal, too soft on crime. His Supreme Court appointees in California actually got voted out for being too soft on crime, and so forth. But he did the death penalty. He was against that, and he did stick to that, right? Even though it cost him some political capital. So yeah, he drew a line on some things, other things, or if he lost, then he had to deal with it, right? So yeah, I hear your point, but it's like everything else in life as well as in politics. You got to make the calculation, right? How far do you go? Where do you draw the line, etc. And the great politician is one who has, wants to do good things and tries and makes the calculation of what they can get and what they can't. And, and they're right on exactly where, as far as they can go to be successful and still keep getting elected, right? And being in a position to keep doing good things. But, nobody's perfect. It's, to get right on that line is difficult, and sometimes they're a little too cautious. Sometimes they're a little too aggressive and they pay for it, right? It's just the way it goes.
So like the kind of extremist thinking that I'm talking about, especially like super far left communist, is really similar to kind of like the MAGA stuff we're seeing right now.
That's what I would say. I hate to be an old fogey here, but that's one of the reasons we're doing this show is to get these different perspectives. But I would say it's naivete, because like I said, when I was younger, and I haven't given up on all those ideas. Look, I'll say it flat out here. There's a lot that Marx wrote about that I think he was right about, but there's also a lot that he was wrong about, right? And the thing is, and you realize just how difficult it is to get some of these things done. And there's multiple reasons for it. One is because maybe it just can't get done to that extreme, right? That it's just not within the realm of human behavior to actually get those things. Another thing is you've got some people who definitely do not want it that way, who are very powerful. And even if you're 100% right and your ideology is 100% right, if there are powerful people opposed to it, they're not just going to roll over and let you do it. And they could be totally wrong, but if they got the power, you're going to have to deal with that, whether you like it or not. And so just to then like hurt your own allies who will get you 85% of what you want because it's not 100%, and then allow the other side to win because of that, it's just suicidal. It's ridiculous. It's what Obama called the what is it? The circular firing squad, where you're attacking each other, where people who should be your allies because they're not ideologically pure enough, and you let the guy that you hate and who's totally against what you stand for get the power, right? That they don't seem to realize that calculation, because that's what happens in politics. We've seen it again and again and again.
Yeah, definitely. I guess another thing I kind of want to offshoot off of that is, especially with this kind of new wave of, I guess, like propaganda or like misinformation or fake news, because we've seen this time and time again with like MAGA, right? We've seen this with a lot of like Trump supporters and stuff. But I'm starting to increasingly see this with like extremists on the left side too, with this kind of communist party thing going on. So I guess my question here is, what are your thoughts on that, and like how similar really are these?
Well, I would say they're similar in that they're both not rational. I would call it faith-based thinking. They believe in their ideology like a religion, that it goes without question. You don't reason it out. It's simply you buy the ideology hook, line, and sinker because you believe in it and you don't deviate from it. And so anything, it's the confirmation bias. Anything that supports it, yes, it's true. Anything that doesn't, you say, oh, it's fake news or it's a conspiracy or something like that. And then you just discard it and you just maintain those views, right? I was talking earlier about, reading, critiques of your own ideology, right? And then like compare them and with an open mind. That's a hard thing for most people to do. I mean, look, I'm a professor. I've done decades of academic training, so it's hard for me to do. And you just expect the average person out there to like read a ton of books, pro and con, with this open mind and like an academic or something. That's not likely to happen, right?
Oh, I mean, I give you an example. Back in the day, I used to love, as many, young, progressively raised children were, used to be very, I have very romanticized views of, 1970s counterculture and stuff like that, right? Until I read this one article somewhere, and I forgot where it even was. But, for all my life, I thought of counterculture as this progressive, highly political, they pushed for civil rights, the anti-war movement in Vietnam, they did all these cool things, they protested, et cetera, free love, free, whatever. And then I read somewhere that, this article critiquing it as like a, totally aristocratic, white person thing, basically. It's like, yeah, but counterculture was for the elite, it was for the white people, and it was almost a virtue signal in the sense that like it was white people getting to say how much they were progressive on the side of, civil rights and stuff like that, without actually, fighting on the ground for civil rights the way that, like black people actually had to in the civil rights movement, a decade before. And reading that totally spoiled my view on it.
Well, see, I found that out from experience, because I also, revered 60s and 70s, anti-authoritarianism, progressivism, and all this stuff. But yeah, when in the 80s, when I came of age, was in college, and we wanted to revive that kind of protest and, things like that, like the UC systems, pension system to get divest from, apartheid South Africa, businesses that were involved with them. We went on this protest, but I looked around me and I saw how out of hand it got, that it became a virtue signaling thing where it was like, who could be the most radical of the protesters? And if you weren't radical enough, oh, well, they're not committed enough or whatever, right? And I just saw people also just kind of jumped on the bandwagon too. And it made me look, and I thought about the 60s and 70s protesters and stuff. And yeah, I'm sure many of them were very much committed. And so, but a lot of them were doing it, I'm sure too, because it was the thing to do. That's what their peers were doing. It was the cool thing. It showed how that you were cool at that time. And then when it became not cool to be protesting, in the 80s or whatever, then it's like you don't protest. Oh, that's for like hippies and losers or whatever. I'm gonna make money in business. That's the cool thing. Now I'm gonna wear a suit and have my hair slicked back and all this. It's just
I know,
fad.
it's a cool thing
It's
now
fad.
too.
It's fadism, and that drove me nuts. I think of the Crosby, Stills, and Nash. Is it also Young? This one where David Crosby saying, "Almost cut my hair," because for him, long hair wasn't just a fad. It was a statement about his political views. And yet you see all those people who cut their hair, or who was it? Was it not Abby Hoffman, but who's the other guy? I can't remember his name right now, but his partner with the Yippies, Jerry Rubin, who after being the 60s radical Yippie, right, turns around and becomes gets into the financial industry, cuts his hair, wears a suit, and becomes, a stockbroker guy. I mean, to me, what was he in it for in the first place? Did his views change? So yeah, I totally get that, Ty. But you gotta kind of try to rise above that, I think, and not throw the baby out with the bathwater, as old people would say, because there is real stuff in what they're pro. Civil rights is a good thing. Women's rights is a good thing. Gay rights is a good thing. And even though a lot of people were phonies about that, doesn't mean that the issues weren't important and aren't still important today. I mean, we're still fighting these same battles today, because this is another example of how the other side, they're not going to stop. They'll never stop.
Yeah, that's why I'm saying it's a romanticized view of it. The point is, it wasn't as cool as I thought it was, because yeah, on one hand it was very progressive, but on the other hand, very bandwagon, very elitist, very aristocratic. And in a lot of ways, the people who had the privilege to be able to go out and protest, the people who didn't have to worry about getting arrested if they sat on the street smoking weed,
That should be working.
were white. Yeah, exactly. Because the people who couldn't afford
Were drafted
that
into Vietnam.
were the ones who were fighting in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Exactly. The ones they were quote unquote fighting for, when in reality they were kind of just having fun.
But would it be better if they'd said nothing and just let them die over there?
Well, it's a decent question, because there are, other things afoot, but I wanted to tie this back to the extremism thing that Kenji was talking about, because I do think, there are a lot of parallels, at least in some ways. And I was wondering if you, at least, with the people that you saw in school, kind of felt the same way as it pertains to, they're preaching these very, left-wing progressive ideals. But, I mean, I, went to the same high school. It's not that underprivileged. You know what I'm saying? I know most of the people who are in the club anyway, are probably a middle class, if not slightly better off backgrounds, so it's what drives them to be so into it.
I actually have no idea what drives them to be so into it.
I do.
Yeah, I have a couple ideas on it, but I would like to piggyback off of the things said there, because yeah, I at least from my experience with this group, it does seem to be a total bandwagon thing. It is totally the fad. A lot of people are joining this group. I think one of the biggest events that kind of kickstarted this entire group kind of spiraling out and kind of spiderwebbing, I guess, having a lot more influence than it originally had, was that they led a student protest that, walked out of the school and was protesting a lot of the things that ICE have been doing in our community. And I was totally in support of that. I think that was a great thing. And that it's one of the things that I do appreciate about this group, which is that because they're so extreme, they're willing to actually get things done. They're willing to actually put actions forward. That said, it gained a ton of popularity for them. And now they have a ton of people who are there, not because they actually believe in the cause and not because they actually adhere to this philosophy, but because they simply want to be part of this fad that's growing. But kind of piggybacking off the idea that my dad already said, is that really a bad thing? I think in part, these people are still protesting for good causes. They still are increasing membership for good things. So I actually was curious on what you guys' thoughts were on that, on people doing this for maybe the wrong reasons, but still having a positive effect.
Well, I mean, extremism drives people to action, no doubt.
Yes.
And I think that is in some ways a good thing. At least it's a good thing when the extreme purpose is, in the right direction.
Yes.
But, it goes too far. And like you said, let's say the leader of this group has all, because let's be real, he's the guy who really has the vision. Everyone else is just kind of like a sheep following, his ideals. This group is led by one individual who, both of us are mutual friends with. He's a great guy. But, he's definitely gotten very ideologically invested in this. And, if the group was to continue action until they got, to his vision, I do not think it would be a better world in the slightest. And I think then I would be saying, oh, the extremism is driving them to action for a bad cause, and so I think that there's definitely a fine line between, extremism pushing people to action, even if that's not necessarily the reason that they're joining it, even if they're just bandwagons, even if they don't ideologically believe in it. I do think it can be good to some degree, right? But there's definitely, I think, a line where they, start doing it to a point that is extreme in a bad way.
Well, a couple of things on it. So one about, you know, doing a good thing, but for the wrong reason. I mean, that's part of politics. A lot of famous leaders, politicians have gotten the public on their side to do something that was good by actually having to kind of deceive them into thinking they were doing something else, right? I mean, it's like, I don't know, Franklin Roosevelt wanting to back, England against Germany in World War II, but the American public just not wanting to get involved in that war. And so, he created the Lend-Lease, system to try to get right, to go behind their backs in a way and to get them to do something that wasn't necessarily what they wanted to do, right? If you just let me finish the next thing, though, and that is, but then you were asking about why do they get so involved in this? Well, is it a young people thing? And I think in part it is. It's an every human being thing to want to be part of a group. I mean, this is why I think a lot of people are, religious and so forth. I'm not. I'll say that because they're part of a group that's connected to something greater than themselves, something higher that gives them a reason to live, a purpose, a goal, a sense of belonging and community, a common, interest and so forth. And people, unfortunately, you can get into any group that'll give you that sense, and the group could be for good things or it could be for bad things, right? You can be in a gang, right? A criminal gang that gives you a sense of belonging, purpose, empowerment, and so forth. Or you can be in a, environmentalist tree hugging group that gives you a sense of belonging, purpose, and, community and so forth. It's a natural human thing. I think I can't prove it. I don't know if sociologists or psychologists have studied these things. I'm sure they have to some extent, but it seems to me from what I've seen that it's a really common thing. I mean, I think we talked about this before. I mean, you look at these young guys who joined, the Nazi party. These were like veterans of World War I who, they had nothing. They were unemployed. The economy was bad. They lost a war, no self-esteem. And they just felt like, hey, we deserve better than that. You got a guy coming along to know we are better than that. Germany's great. We got ripped off. It wasn't because of you that we lost the war. You were stabbed in the back by communist Jews and bad politicians, right? And so it empowered them as well. I'm going to join the Nazi party. We're going to right the ship. We're going to make Germany great again and all this. You see that so often in so many movements. And especially young people, I hate to say it, because of the naivete, can be manipulated into being zealots for a cause. That's why you have young men going out fighting wars, They want the excitement, adventure, to feel important. They're going to be a hero. They're going to do something great, right? It's very easy to manipulate.
Purpose is totally missing in everyday life.
Yes.
But I think it goes deeper than that. I agree.
Well, that's part of it. There's never one.
Yes, of course. But, on the first thing, for every FDR who's making a Lend-Lease program to fight World War II, there's a Bush who's talking about
lying. I know.
To invade Iraq. And I think that there's almost a pretext to, the second part of what you're talking about when it comes to, people joining extremist groups because of the community. And that's, the other thing that we were kind of planning on talking about today, which is that people, and by the way, another Nazi reference, third Nazi reference in 3 episodes, I believe.
Look, I'm going to say, the reason that's so studied and talked about, because it is so instructive about when you see extremes, human beings doing extremes things or put to extremes, that's when you see our true colors in many ways, right? You see both the bad, the good, the bad, and the ugly, right? You see the horrible things and Nazis, but of course we know that there were Germans sheltering Jews in some cases, right? Or people like, the famous Anne Frank in the Netherlands, where, so you see also great things that people do in those extreme cases, right? Acts of courage and compassion. So this is why these things are so fascinating to us in history, because there's so much to be learned about human beings. This is what drama is all about. When movies or plays or literature, they put people in extreme cases because that's where you really see what makes them tick. In the mundane world, you kind of don't notice. It might be there if you look really closely, but when you see people put to extremes, then you really begin to understand, right, what they're all about. And that's why, I'm going to keep making Nazi references because I've studied it a lot. This is, my specialty is in the ancient world. I've studied that a lot, so I'll make references to that. But that's what history's for. It's to learn from. I'm not going to be simplistic and say, well, they're exact parallels, repeats itself. Everything is
Yes.
complex.
But talking about learning
Yeah,
and people,
right.
one of the other things we were going to talk about today was about people, or kind of society in general, going through a period of relative softness, right? We were talking about earlier, we were having a family dinner. It's Father's Day, by the way.
Yes.
Happy Father's Day. But we were talking about people kind of making excuses and getting out of things, whereas, back in my day, as he said, things were different, right? And you gave a little anecdote about teaching a class despite, the tremendous hardship the day before. And so, yeah, I wanted to kind of switch the topic to that. What do you think about that?
Sure, we can go to. Well, we've talked about this. I mean, look, I'm a bleeding heart liberal in many ways. I wouldn't want to live in here. You have an ancient reference like ancient Sparta. This sort of
Actually, can you explain bleeding heart liberal? I feel like most people don't even use the term anymore.
Yeah,
It's a dead term.
yeah. No, it just meant because conservatives, right wingers, called liberals bleeding hearts because we were too soft. Basically, that our hearts bled for every lost cause. Oh, the poor, oh, the downtrodden. People of color. Oh, they this and that. We're going to help them. And so they called them bleeding hearts as a criticism. But me, I'm proud of it. I want to be realistic too, and I know that there are limits, which is nothing Brown understood about government. There are limits. He was a liberal, but there are limits to what you can do, right? So I understand there are limits, but we want to help people, right? And we want to help people help themselves. I mean, we're a community. We're people. We're social creatures. Wouldn't we want to do this? So I'm proud to be called a bleeding heart. Now, if you called me a soft or weak or whatever, now I wouldn't be proud of that. And that's part of what we're talking about here.
Yeah. I mean, I guess my opinions on, our society becoming increasingly soft, or, not being like those older generations that can, just tough it out or get through it, or, walk it off, things like that. And I would say that, yeah, like it is getting increasingly soft to an extent. And just personally speaking, from like schooling, for example, it's become so soft that it's kind of the expected norm. For example, if you're like turning an assignment in late and you make some excuse about being sick, even if you weren't sick, whatever, it doesn't really matter. You're kind of expecting an answer of, oh, I'm so sorry, get an extension, right? And I think people are increasingly abusing that, and it's kind of compounding on itself to become even more soft. And I do wonder where that kind of leads us in the future. But I also understand that it kind of you need to have some kind of leeway there as well.
I'm smiling a little bit because Kenji, I have to say, is a little notorious for cutting corners, trying to get the, extension or procrastinating on some household chore. And he's lucky that I'm soft when it comes to parenting. There's been very little disciplining in this family, but they're good kids. And I should tell you that Kenji just graduated from high school. He'll be going to college in the fall. So, yeah, well, you told me, for example, that like about Chat GPT or use of AI, that like you said, like most of the students use these things.
Oh, totally.
Yeah. So I mean, so that's they're not even doing the work, and even then they can't turn things in on time, right?
Mediocrity is the standard, man. It pissed me off when I was a kid because you always hear these things when you're in high school, or but even before that, when you're in elementary school and you're in middle school, they'd be like, "Hey, that won't slide in high school," and then in high school they'd be like, "Hey, that won't slide in college," like I'll give you the extension now, but just wait until you get to college, and it'll be so much harder. It's actually easier in college. It's tremendous. I mean, in high school, they don't really care about due dates. In high school, they, let you slide on X, Y, and Z. In high school, a lot of kids didn't even show up to class. In college, it's like nobody shows up to class. It's ridiculous. And it's unfortunate because I think that I'm going to like #1 public university in the world or whatever, right?
I would say my alma mater, where Kenji will be going, is the #1 one. But hey.
Yeah. Berkeley over UCLA any day.
No, bro.
But regardless, you can't even say shit. You don't even go to school yet.
Yeah, I gave him a tour of the campus. You saw how beautiful it was.
Oh yeah, you saw campus one time. I will admit their campus is more beautiful than mine, but whatever. The point is, at some of the best public institutions in the world, it's still incredible mediocrity everywhere. And I was venting to you a few days ago about this job I had in student government, because like the very baseline was just to show up to the meetings.
Yep.
And like we had an office of like 5 at the start of the year. By the end of the year, 2 of us were showing up to the meetings consistently. Like 2 left and the other one just like AWOL, right? And it's like, I cannot believe that kind of thing like slides, you know?
I don't know. The school can teachers can teach you to be responsible to a certain extent, making sure you turn things in on time, and however they get you to do that, and get you to believe that that's important. But of course, a big part of it's your parenting too. And I don't know how other parents do. Like I said, I've not been very hard on them at all in their growth, but that's because for the most part they've been great kids, and don't get in trouble, get good grades and everything. But yeah, for me personally, I think for both of you, it's just kind of a matter of pride. I couldn't imagine, unless I really, really had serious excuse, like hospitalized or something, to ask for an extension to turn something in, or like a redo or something. That just is not the way I was raised. It's just like, the thing is due on this date, you got to get it done on this date. And if you didn't have time, or you weren't feeling well, and so you didn't do as good a job as you'd like, no, that's the way it goes sometimes. It's just the way it is.
I think it's one thing to ask for an extension, like, and I understand that if things happen, things you want to ask for an extension just to see if you'll get it. The thing that really pisses me off, and you have a million stories about this, it's the kids who fucking complain when they don't get
expect
it. And
it's
like,
entitled.
yeah, well, you're entitled to it. Like, come on, the due date's the due date, man. You're you're privileged if you get an extension, not the other way around.
And if you don't give some ridiculously unreasonable extension without good cause, then you just get burned on your evaluations, right? And then you don't get tenure or whatever. I mean, no, it's I believe that, again, in balance. I'll say that a lot in these shows. Balance, I've learned in my old age, is really important. And so you want to give students some say, because I know there's plenty of crappy professors or teachers who don't do their job and just phone it in. But at the same time, you don't want to give them like total control, where professors are living in fear of bad evals, so they can't actually hold their students accountable and make them turn stuff in on time, right? Or you've heard of the great inflation, right? Harvard, now they just made some rule about, hey, we're going to give a certain percentage A's, because it's ridiculous. I get students complaining to me when I give them an A minus. I deserve an A, it's like it's constantly these kind of complaints and extensions and accommodations. And again, American Disabilities Act, I think, is a great thing. I don't think I'm an ableist, but when you see the study about Stanford, that 40% of Stanford students are getting an accommodation of some sort, there can't be 40% of the student population that truly needs those accommodations. That's way too high a percentage of the population, right? I don't think that's what the intent of
40% of Stanford students have an extra chromosome.
Yeah. Well, is that a Berkeley?
Yeah, it's a Berkeley stat.
Okay.
Our researchers, at Lawrence Lab, didn't put in the work.
Hey, I am kind of confused then here, because, yeah, like even students in my school, high school, recognize this. Students at the college level recognizes this. Teachers are recognizing that it's all getting a lot softer. And I'm wondering, if everybody recognizes this as kind of an issue, as something that's happening, why, not even that like it's not improving, but why are we on such a fast downhill slope?
Well, where do you think it starts?
What do you mean? Where?
Why did people start getting soft? Where did it start? Is it parents' fault? Is it teachers' fault? Like, whose fault is it? Let's blame someone. I'm ready to blame someone.
I mean, I really have no idea who's to blame. I think it's equally a result of kind of all of these, influences, and it's also a result of our the events that have happened, right? I think it got a lot softer after COVID.
Yeah, I would point to COVID was a major factor.
Yeah, people were all getting softer because, well, these kids have had one less year of education, so we have to make things softer for them. And then during that time, AI hit. So now they're not even doing their own work. And now they're relying on this AI to do it for them. So when they do have to do their own work, maybe it's like a state test, maybe it's a real test, they're doing even more poorly, and teachers are recognizing, oh no, like they're failing. So I think it's a result of all these circumstances. But I still wonder why it's continually getting worse when we're recognizing
well, because there are many causes. And I think COVID definitely, because, we got soft in COVID, but for good reasons, right? This was a dangerous thing. People had family members who were sick. They were having to deal with stuff and whatever. So I get that. But we're out of that now, largely. And so we should be going back to quote unquote normal. And yet I think that generation of students doesn't realize that, that was their normal, to be able to turn things in late, to get various accommodations because of it. And they haven't quite gotten the lesson, or until the next generation of students come in, that no, you do have to turn things on time. COVID's not the issue anymore, right? But I think there's also just a natural tendency, and you can see this with parenting, that, and it makes sense. You want to make the lives of your kids better than yours. You know, you don't want to have to make them work, child labor and unsafe conditions like in the 10s or something like that. And you want to pay for their school. You want to get them a car. You want to make sure they're safe, and so you drive them to school. They don't have to walk to school anymore. But all of this, right, has the unintended consequence. That's why it's a very complex world, right? You do one thing and then it messes up something else. That then it makes them softer. Then they expect things to be everything done for them, right? And they don't have to walk to school anymore like I used to have. And I wore shoes. I wasn't barefoot. And I lived in Southern California, so it wasn't snowing or anything like that. But still, we had to walk to school or ride our bicycles. I was shocked when with my own sons here. I said, well, it's out of riding a bicycle. So they don't even have bike racks, at the school.
Yeah,
it's just something that's not done. It's like, what? And now they get electric bikes, and so like kids aren't even going to get in worse physical shape because they're not even pedaling bicycles anymore. It's all electric, right? It's just going to compound our obesity issues and heart disease and who knows what,
No, I know. I mean, have you seen the literacy rates for this, youth right now in America in particular? It's really bad. I mean,
yeah, I've seen the stats on these too. I think in math, the average student is like 0.6 years behind on their math education. For English, it's I think like 0.4 years behind, like full years of education behind. So we're definitely falling behind in this regard.
That's funny.
But your mother always used to talk about is a literature professor about how more than half of the entering students at the state university were not passing the basic, writing competency exam.
Oh yeah, there's new statistics too on like I don't know what percent, but like a huge percentage of students who are going into college or needing to take like remedial math classes to like relearn the stuff that they were supposed to have already known.
But this is part of the thing too. I don't know if this goes under soft, right? Because it's a complex issue. But even the remediation itself, right, is kind of like, I wouldn't say taboo, but like, can you remediate? And you're singling it out. Some groups, maybe they've had disadvantages and so on, which again, I sympathetic to and understand. But then again, I mean, it's like, we got a society here. And, if you keep accommodating every individual, every group, every whatever, then there's no standard. Now, I know, look, I'm a liberal guy, but I know for liberals to use the term standards, it sounds like right-wing rhetoric, right? And I don't want to, and I certainly don't agree with him, but at the same time, there got to be some standards, right?
You have to take a test.
Yeah, exactly.
Testing is discriminatory.
Right. Well, that's and that's the thing. Well, see, and this is one thing conservatives, I understand the criticisms of liberals in that we want things to be too perfect. That's the bleeding heart thing. Like we want to care for every single person, make everybody live these perfect lives, but you get diminishing returns, right? The closer you're trying to get to whatever this idea of perfection is, it's not worth it in a way because it's having an effect in so many other areas, like making the rest of the folks who don't need any accommodations kind of start taking advantage of those accommodations and getting softer, right? And then the whole society becomes softer. Then you fall behind other countries, and then you whatever. I mean, I understand those arguments, right? But this is where I would go to moderation, balance. There's got to be a midpoint where you can accommodate people who really need accommodations, right? And who if, otherwise without a disability, for example, would do just as good work as anybody else, in whatever professions. That's great. That's what these accommodations are for, right? But if they're just not able to do that job, should you accommodate them for that job, right? That's what I wonder about. Like maybe that's a little too liberal there, right?
Yeah. So like, not taking any particular political side on this, but from a teacher's point of view, like where do you think that point is where you're starting to get diminishing returns? Like where do you think the point is where, okay, you're being too soft and now you're encouraging them to care less, try less hard and expect these accommodations?
Well, right. And that's the thing. So if I accommodate one student, this is the old classic thing. Well, if I accommodate one student says, well, I had a death in the family, 3 weeks ago, and therefore
can I give you an exception?
Yeah, I have to give everyone an exception. Right. Do I have to give everybody a set? But that's a legitimate argument. You think about it, It's like, well, no one knows
universalization principle, categorical imperative.
Oh, there you go. That education is learning something.
Yeah.
So that is an issue because then
you would know a lot about that later.
Then everybody gets the accommodation. Then everybody can turn in late. And when I was younger, a younger professor, I used to be like cool about these things. Yeah, yeah, I'm not going to take attendance. Hey, if you don't want to be here, that's fine. You come when you want. Oh yeah, you can turn things in late. I'm like, oh yeah, I'll add extra students, of course. But then you realize that there's a downside to these things. Yeah, because then students just take advantage of it. They're not turning anything in on time, or nobody's showing up to class, or it's just at some place, no, you got to be here, and that's it, and it's going to be part of your grade. That's so yeah, again, balance I've discovered. So I'm not a reactionary conservative. So, see all these liberal principles that I believe in. No, I still think they're good, but it's a matter of degree, right? It's a matter of degree.
So I'd like to hear the college perspective on this then. And maybe I'll give mine too as like the high school perspective. But like, where do you think that line is where you're trying to get into your terms? Like,
We'll give the high school perspective.
well, from my perspective, I don't know. I think I'm a little too harsh on it, but it might get increasingly harsh the younger you get. From the more you've seen it like become as soft as it is. And I think that, accommodations are kind of like almost always going too far. Like maybe, of course, you got to give accommodations when people are like, they have a death in the family, or they have some actual serious issue. But the way it stands right now, people are getting tons of accommodations for literally anything, right? They'll miss class because they're sick, right? Their parent calls them out sick because they have a mental health day or something, because they've just like, oh, I've gone to school 4 days this week. That's too much already. I'm too stressed, right? And like, sure, like having mental health days, that could be important, right? Especially if you are genuinely having like difficulties keeping up. But I think it's gone so far to the point where you have to kind of take most of these excuses with a grain of salt now, as unfortunate as that sounds and as kind of dystopian as that is, So in my opinion, I feel like accommodations should be really rarely handed out, in terms of like extensions on stuff, or, normal excuses if you're like a regular student. Obviously, if you have, like special needs, that's something that we should definitely be accommodating. If you have like financial difficulties, you should definitely be accommodating that. But if, you're the everyday student and you have some like random issue come up, I feel like those should really be taken with a grain of salt.
This guy's shooting himself in the foot. He's like the welfare queen of extensions.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think I deserve what I got, like, not to brag or anything, but I got salutatorian for my class. And I don't think that I deserve that with the level of work that I put in. But because of all these accommodations, because of all these extensions, because to an extent, I know if I make some random excuse, I'm going to get an extension, I was able to get that spot. And I don't think that's fair. I don't think that makes any sense.
Yeah, this motherfucker got most studious as like a senior superlative. Dude, he's not like every single assignment was late. I don't know how that even happened.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you can see it happening right now, though, right? Like I got that senior superlative, and I don't deserve that for sure. So, I mean, I think it's getting to the point where we have to set hard lines, and we have to start being a little bit more strict so that students can actually.
I know he's going to become a reactionary.
I know, this is the pipeline. This is the pipeline. No, I mean, I think the funniest thing is you say you don't deserve it. I do think you deserved it, and that but that's kind of the funniest thing. It's like
the bar is not
exactly. The bar is so low that it's like,
because
hey, you won it handedly.
You might have gotten extensions, but at least you eventually turned them in, and maybe the other people did.
I mean, maybe that's the other thing though, because now, in my opinion at least, and I don't know if this extends to college too, but for high school, it becomes less about actually learning your classes and or learning the subjects. Sorry. It's less about learning the subjects, being studious, working hard, and more about learning the classes, right? Learning how far you can push teachers to where they'll still grade your assignments, learning how little work you can do on an assignment to still get it done, And I think that's definitely something that's existed for a long time now. I just think it's getting even worse with the level of, extensions and accommodations that we are giving people. Because now you're just trying to game it out instead of actually learning.
Yeah, no, I agree with you. And it's funny because I was actually thinking about hijacking the conversation earlier and turning it into something that I wanted to talk to, which deals with this because I think we were talking kind of about the genesis of the soft, epidemic, if you'll call it that, in COVID or whatever. And I don't necessarily agree that it's COVID. I definitely think that things got worse during COVID, but I feel like we were kind of already heading there.
Oh yeah.
And I think that part of the reason is kind of what you're getting at here, which is that I think that people stopped wanting, like, especially in education, and this might be really only to do with education, but I think culture shifted so that, I mean, it was never like really cool to be a nerd, but I think that there was like a point in time where education was like seen as much more important, and it was like, well, you do want to get a good education. You do want to like learn well, even if that's just so that you can get a good job or whatever. Now it's like, you see these articles, which I find very interesting, which is like the new highest mark for prestige is actually to drop out of college. instead of getting a
Yeah,
college
and be an
degree.
entrepreneur,
Because
a creator,
exactly.
an influencer, and yeah.
And everyone jokes that F students are inventors, right?
Right.
But that's actually the mark of being an inventor in college. It's like the most prestigious thing you can do in college right now is drop out, not finish your degree,
Well, thing is,
create a startup,
I-
and make a bajillion dollars.
I would like to see some statistics on how many of those dropouts actually become millionaires. What are the percentages? I wonder.
Very few,
Yeah,
but the
yeah.
thing is, at the point you're dropping out of college, your startup probably is kind of semi-successful, and that's kind of why it's prestigious, And the thing is, even regardless of any of that, one of my friends was talking about this back when I was going to school before break, and I thought it was a really interesting point. Back in the 60s, back in the 70s, and this is kind of what we romanticize about that era anyway. But like on Berkeley campus, there was this guy who did a bunch of interviews, and when he asked students why they went to college, like the resounding most common answer was, I want to learn. I want to enrich my mind. I want to have this experience. I want to, open broader horizons. Now they did the same thing, and by far the majority of the students said they want to make more money when they grow up. Basically,
It's clear to me.
I want a
Look,
better job.
as teaching in the humanities, teaching history, look, you can clearly see that, that a lot of students have to take it for a GE, general education, and they don't want to because they just want to. And even the system is cutting GE because they want to turn it into a vocational school where it's all about you just get in there, you get your degree, and you make as much money as possible. So that has been going on for a long time. I wanted to mention I read a book kind of you talked about the genesis of this or why it's this way about I can't if it's called like the coddling of the American mind or the coddling of the American child. It's
Great coddling.
Yeah, and I can't remember the two authors' names.
I
but,
survived.
But it was about it, and it has to do a lot with the parenting, like the helicopter parenting and all this kind of stuff. And there was this famous line is like, do you prepare the road for the child or do you prepare the child for the road? And the way I was raised, I mean, here my mother, is a child of immigrants who didn't speak English, who worked, as migrant farmers in Hawaii and sugarcane fields, who, got a public education, became a teacher. And, so she like worked really hard. And her thing was like, I'm not going to prepare the road for you. You've got to learn how to deal with things the way they are. And you got to adapt to it. You got to work hard. You got to be smart. You got to whatever. And so, I in a way tried to raise my own kids that way. But yeah, I mean, so part of it just has to do with how, and this has been like, it's not just choice of parents and how they raise their kids, but it's kind of a social and cultural thing in our country about how we raise kids, right? That's been geared towards, like I said, driving them to school and, get like everything done, you're hiring tutors for them. And again, everything is prepared for them rather than, they got to do some of the stuff on their own, right? They got to take some initiative or they got to overcome some obstacles sometimes, right? It just wasn't that way when I was a kid. I mean, they used to just like go out and play, and you're out there all day on your own, and you're trying to navigate peer groups and getting in fights or bullies or doing some things that are maybe dangerous or whatever and surviving. You just kind of learn on the fly from that. But now everything's controlled. We just play sports. We just pick up and start playing sports or make up our own games. Now you have to like sign up for some league sports, some youth sports things, and they got to have coaches and they have all these rules. And then they hire outside coaching to make them better. And I mean, it's all like much more controlled for the kids and like the road paved for them. So it's just, but again, it's like I said, it's natural for parents to want to make it better for the kids. And that's the instinct that drives that, even though again, unbeknownst to them,
that schedule guy just has to learn how to cut you off.
It has some negative.
Just start talking.
It has some negative consequences though that were unforeseen.
Exactly. No, I want to add some nuance to kind of both of those points. Like on Ty's point earlier about the social aspect, I partially agree. I think I don't know how it is for college. She said it was a lot to do with like money and stuff. And to an extent, it's the same, at least from my high school point of view, with a lot of people only pushing these extracurriculars and stuff for college. I had like a whole speech on this too. It was a whole thing. But yeah, tons of people like in high school are totally pushing extracurriculars and grades for the sole purpose of college. And a lot of that reason they're trying to get into college is so they can make more money. I mean, business is like one of the fastest growing majors. Like everybody under the sun is running for business. Now, are all of them actually going to get into business? Probably not. A lot of them are probably going to drop out and try to run their own business, right? But the idea is that they want all that money. That said, at least in my high school, from my experience, the nerd wasn't really like an outcast social group. I think the nerd actually did have a decent amount of prestige, and there was kind of a lot of good opinions based off of academic performance. But again, I kind of do think that's a lot to do with, oh, well, they're going to go to college and they're going to make more money. So at the end of the day, yeah, I think it does kind of come back to the money there, and people are increasingly doing things for that. But I wouldn't totally agree that the nerd is becoming like not obsolete, but like especially unpopular in today's world. It might even be becoming more popular. But on that point about kind of paving the road for the child, I think that's totally getting worse too. I mean, from personal experience, there's tons of people like that I've been close with, that I've known, whose parents are like totally paving the road. I mean, there's one specific example where one of my friends only went to school like 4 days a week, almost every week, because every week their parent would just pull them out of school for a mental health day, even though they're totally doing fine, right? They don't need it at all. So yeah, I think there is a total thing about the road being paid for these kids. And I would agree that it's not good in a lot of senses, but maybe the survival rates from not doing like dumb shit when you're younger.
Well, it's true. And I lost a good friend from just a stupid accident, kids playing. But we're getting close to the time here. But I do want to say one hope for education, going back to the idea of just learning and being a whole person, a responsible citizen, an informed voter in our democratic society, and a return to liberal arts sort of idea of education instead of vocational, is AI, believe it or not. Because AI is going to put a lot of those jobs are not going to exist anymore. These kind of the things that you would get the vocational training. Yeah,
like
no, and so maybe education would return to the reason you do that is full education and not just getting a vocation that AI can do instead. But go ahead, Ty.
No, I think it's totally wrong. I think you made a really good point about nerds being more popular, and I totally agree with you. But I think, to your point earlier, they're more popular because they're better at doing school, not better at learning or care more about learning. AI is the example of that. I mean, the valedictorian of Kenji's class is like the greatest AI scene I've ever seen. Like, I don't think I ever did an assignment.
Yeah, let me have a sign in on that. He was so invested in AI and so like using it, or I guess using it so much on his assignments, that he wrote a script so that AI would transcribe. It's like if you wrote something into ChatGPT, instead of copying and pasting it because you get caught, it would like physically write it for him because he used it so often. Like, it's a problem. It's getting bad.
Yeah, that's just ridiculous, And I agree with you when you say that AI will replace a lot of those jobs, so maybe we don't have to learn some of those things. But I think that totally defeats the purpose of learning. I think we've gotten so brainwashed. I was talking about this earlier, and I know, I brought up Russell Means, who is problematic, but I do really like his take in the sense that, these Western ideologies, even, capitalism, communism, which you were talking about earlier, are all bent around production, and it doesn't matter how you redistribute the wealth. At the end of the day, they're all, their end goal is still to produce the most, to have the most effective way to produce.
Yeah, he didn't make that. It's called the growth mentality, by the way, and that goes back early in capitalism. Because my early research was on the ancient Greek economy, and that was one of the big questions: did the ancient Greeks have this growth mentality that is at the core of capitalism, but which you say says even in communism, you still have a growth mentality.
The point is that it's also in communism. Yes, the point itself.
But and the question in that is that a cultural construction, or is that natural to human beings? And therefore, did the ancient Greeks, because they're human beings too, did they have the same growth mentality as we do in modern times, or is that a product of our modern culture to be that way? And I think it's a little of both, right? Culturally, they had like Aristotle criticizes what we would call a growth mentality in making money to make more money. He thought was unnatural and bad for society, actually, because it has no end, which is part of his philosophy. Everything would have to have a purpose.
I'd argue that that's totally a human nature thing, to be honest. Like, sure, you can argue whether that's a good thing or not. I'd argue that to the point it's gotten to now, it's probably a bad thing. But I think that's totally in human nature, because ultimately we've always wanted to better our situation, right? Like, we always want more than what we currently have. For example, you could be full, you could have a full stomach, you got food, but you'd still want more food or better food for the winter, or better food for your rainy day, right? Yeah. So I do think that's totally in human nature, and that kind of begs the question: what do we actually do about this growth mentality when all these other systems can't really solve it?
It is part of human nature, but there's also human nature to be lazy and like say,
Exactly
I'm just happy with enough here. I don't want to work my butt off to make more. I'm good where I am. So there's both. See, human beings are complex, and that's why any ideology, any one system to try to explain everything they fall short because there's so much variation within humanity.
But this isn't just explaining things. This is, trekking a course for where we set the standard in the future. And I agree with you. And that is the point I was going to make, but it's not necessarily the contrarian point of being lazy. It's that there are all these other things that are also in our nature that we could focus on.
Charity.
Focusing on growing, focus on relationships, focus on connection, there are a bunch of things that are also in our nature that don't necessarily mean making the most possible and driving. And I'm sure there are problems with the other things too, but there's just different ways to think about the world. And I think we've gotten way too hell bent on production.
Well, that's a great point because most people want a lot of money or a lot of possessions, a lot of wealth or security. But we also want, like you said, relationships. We also want to.
What happened to money can't buy me love?
Right. We also want to be charitable and love. And these things aren't supposed to be about money, right? We want these things too. How is it that money became the end all, right? Wealth became the end all, right? Because it doesn't necessarily have to be. Yeah, of course, it's going to always be important. But does it have to be the one and only important thing that overshadows everything else?
No, I actually want to talk about that like money buying love really quick. I know we're like running short on
yeah,
time.
we're just
But yeah, I mean, you can totally see it in social media right now. There's this whole thing about just like buying love, right? There's this whole thing about all these girls feeding over the guy with a nice car, right? And like, sure, that's a societal thing that's been built for a long time here, but it's getting so much worse now, and it's getting so like influential, I guess, in social media. And yeah, I totally think that's a huge thing that's going on.
Well, that's, I would argue like sociobiologically, that's always been a thing in the dominance hierarchy. And, it's spreading the genes is like the strongest guy when you have the harem or whatever, right? But now it's instead of being expressed in muscles or defeating the enemy in war, it's expressed through how much money you make. That is now the measure, right? We just have different measures, but there's always been a measure of what is a good gene pool to get involved in or something like that, right? To pick a mate or whatever. It's just our society. Yeah, it's become about money and material possessions as status symbols. That's all. Yeah.
That's why I'm going to be the Wolf of Wall Street, man.
Oh, great. You're going to sell out.
That's my business track.
I was going to be a sellout before, but then I became an academic because I decided I didn't want to do that after having done an internship at a stock brokerage and hating.
Yeah, and it guys, that's to my job.
Yeah. All right, folks, but we're going to wrap it up here because we've gone like an hour, which is way past anybody's attention span, but I hope we were interesting enough for you to want to listen to the whole thing. We'll be back next time to talk about who knows what, something interesting. We didn't even talk about anything in the news like today. There's so much to talk about, but we'll get to things when we get to them.
Yeah, later.
All right, so long. Bye.
Yep.